Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here, back to review episode 7 of Sharp Objects on HBO, an episode called Falling. I hope you're up to speed on this show because I'm about to rant and rave about one of the best episodes of TV I expect any of us will see all year. But before I dig into tonight's recap and review, I do want to say thank you for all of you in the comments last week who were sending me well wishes, hoping that I would get over my sickness from last week. But as I was watching tonight's episode, the only thing I could think to myself was, thank God I don't have Adora looking after me. When we get to the end of calendar year 2018 and we look at all the horror films and all the thrillers and all the great TV shows, I don't know if there'll be a more terrifying image than Adora and her tray in that blue bottle. This is one of those episodes that almost gave me a panic attack while I was watching it. It probably would have been pretty amusing if I had a camera set up to record my reaction to this episode because I was standing, huffing and puffing and rubbing my hands together and just getting squeamish. To put it mildly, this is one very creepy, eerie, disturbing show. And I think one of the main reasons this episode felt so much stronger than some of the episodes before, Gillian Flynn, the author of the novel that the show is based upon, she was one of the writers of this particular episode, and she will be on next week's episode as well. But if, like me, you're becoming a massive fan of Gillian Flynn's work, not to worry. After next week's episode, there's a lot of great Gillian Flynn content coming our way. She's one of the screenwriters on Steve McQueen's film Widows, which is coming out on November 16th. And she's also working on a giant show called Utopia for Amazon, which is inspired by the show from the UK of the same name. But before I dive into the bits and pieces of my official recap, I do have to say I think this is the strongest episode of the season by far. It's almost like the showrunners just decided to nail down the throttle and just go for it. We just had revelation after revelation. So many pieces started falling into place. Watching Amy Adams and her dawning horror and her realization about her mother over the course of the episode was just a masterclass in acting. And I know some people might be thinking, oh, well, all the mysteries are solved at this point. What is there left to do in the final episode? And the honest answer is, I don't know because I haven't read the book. But I just want to put this out there. As much concern as I might have felt on Amma's behalf over the course of this episode, I'm not entirely convinced that she and Alan are innocent when it comes to the murders of Anna and Natalie. But as you can tell, I'm pretty amped up and I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow things down and start from the beginning of the episode. The episode begins with a really creepy dream sequence where we see Camille looking into Amma's dollhouse, and we get this eerie little moment where we see something moving inside, and obviously this dollhouse will come into play in a big way later in the episode. But when Camille wakes up, we see that her mother has undressed her in her sleep and placed her in this very strange nightgown. For a girl who likes to walk around in all black, it was definitely an unusual look for her. But we see that her ankle is totally jacked and covered in bruises. She's insanely dehydrated from all the booze and ecstasy she took the previous evening. And we see Adora moving in her maternal fashion, trying to subject Camille to her tender love and care. And she even has this really creepy line about how here's a little bit of sweet before the bitter. Luckily, Camille's able to kind of shake herself out of her fog, come to her senses, says she has to get some work done, and bolts. And as she bolts, she slams the door shut, and we get yet another creepy shot of Marion Crellin in the mirror as she does so. Before Camille leaves the house, she pops in to check on Amma, and we see that Amma is more or less fine, but she admits that she really enjoys it when Adora looks after her. She admits that the best part about being hungover is the fact that her mother's going to take care of her. It's this really weird, strange, codependent relationship. Adora obviously loves to look at her daughter Amma as this innocent, needy little girl, almost like a doll to be played with. And of course, Amma knows as long as she plays along, she gets to basically do whatever the hell she wants. But an interesting part of this episode is seeing how Willis, in spite of being largely impotent throughout the course of the season, in terms of actually solving mysteries, we see him get a lot of work done this episode. He successfully hunts down this nurse who lost her job years ago when she raised concerns about Adora. And as a result, Willis is able to gather all this evidence on Marion Crellin. And what the nurse tells him is that basically Adora suffers from Munchausen's by proxy syndrome. Munchausen syndrome is when somebody likes to pretend like they're sick all the time, but Munchausen's by proxy syndrome is when you make other people sick so that you can take care of them, and more importantly, have other people see you taking care of that person. The nurse did everything she could for Marion Crellin, who was suffering from a variety of symptoms as well as a variety of treatments. She was way over medicated, and it seemed like Adora was just creating all sorts of chaos and confusion. Obviously, Marion died, and the nurse's warnings went totally in vain. But back on the home front, we see Amma very briefly express a little independent streak, and she basically tells her mother that she's fine, she doesn't need the medicine, she doesn't need to be treated like a baby anymore, and Adora just has an absolute shit fit. She immediately overreacts like, oh, well, I guess you don't need me anymore, I guess you can pay your own bills, I guess you can look after yourself, I guess you can clean your room, just lays this enormous guilt trip on her, starts like dismantling the dollhouse, starts behaving in a far more childlike fashion than Amma typically does, and Amma reluctantly complies, gets into bed, and starts sucking on the poison that her mother eagerly feeds her. But as if this episode didn't have enough going on, we see see the chief talking to Ashley, and as we all know, Ashley's been craving some publicity the entire season, and the chief finally offers her exactly that and says he'll put a positive spin out there about what a good deed she's done from the town if she'll help him find John. And she ends up providing the chief with a key piece of evidence that there's blood underneath John's bed. That's all the chief needs to put out a warrant for John's arrest, but we see that Camille's actually successfully hunted down John in this Mexican bar and grill. It looks more like a house than an actual restaurant, but they have a few drinks and Camille gives him a chance to share his side of the story. She doesn't believe he's the killer. And as they're talking, John does give her a crucial piece of evidence. He says that his sister Natalie's nails were painted when the dead body was found, and that was something that Natalie would never do. Someone obviously did that for her. But as she's trying to encourage him to drink some water and go back to the hotel and sleep it off so that he can turn himself in, she accompanies him back to his room. They both start feeling incredibly vulnerable. They start sharing a lot about themselves, and one thing leads to another, and they end up getting pretty intimate. And unlike with Willis, where she kept her body totally covered, Camille actually lets John see every inch of her body. To my knowledge, this is the first time that any man has seen every inch of her body since she started cutting herself. Although, I should say this, a few commenters pointed out last week that it'd be really difficult for Camille to carve the words in her back, which suggests either two things. A giant plot hole, or B, she had an accomplice. I imagine it's probably the former, but visually and photographically, it just looks so much more interesting for her to have those words on her back. But I doubt we're going to learn in the final episode that at some point she had somebody helping her carve those words. In any case, while they're having sex, we see back on the home front, Amma's situation's gone from bad to worse. She's sweating profusely. When her friends come by to try to see her, she tries to reach out to them with her second phone. Adora puts the kibosh on that, feeds her a little more poison, takes that phone away. And at this point in the episode, I was just getting dizzy with all the revelations and all the information. And then John gave Camille even more information while they're lying in bed together. He's trying to say it in a really sweet way because he's totally naive about Adora, but he says that Adora was the one person in town who cared about Anne and Natalie. She was always trying to fix them, always trying to save them. As he describes it, she was trying to solve them. And Camille laughs about the fact that her mother was never able to solve her, and she has a really intense memory about rejecting her mother's medicine. And as she has that memory, it all clicks, and she starts to realize Adora had to have played a major role in what happened to Anne and Natalie. But before they can take their conversation any further, the cops burst in, they arrest John. Willis is absolutely destroyed that Camille is there with John. He says a few horrible things to Camille, but what he does do, he does share the medical file on Camille's sister. Camille is absolutely floored by all this information and goes to see Jackie to confirm it. Jackie's at home alone, drinking, popping pills, and she's more than happy to spill the beans. She tells Camille that Adora's medication was one of the main reasons why Camille's sister was cremated. And Jackie almost seems to admit that she knew precisely what was going on, but that she didn't really feel like there was anything she could do about it. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be revising their opinion of Jackie moving forward after this episode. At this point, we see where this episode gets its title from falling, because we can see emotionally Amy Adams is absolutely fallen. She calls her boss. She's absolutely beside herself with grief. She stumbles her way through telling her boss that Adora is responsible for the murder of the two girls and that she's up to it again. And at precisely the same time, we can see the back on the home front that Amma's just puking up all this vile pink shit into a bowl. And this is when we got a twist that I absolutely did not see coming. And I wonder if everybody's interpreting the scene the same way I am. But we see that Alan is downstairs listening to music, and he's having all these memories of Amma as a little girl. He's having memories about dancing with her when she was in a more innocent phase. And the way I interpreted it, it's almost as if Alan in his own mind and in his own way is saying goodbye to his baby girl because he realizes that Adora most likely is planning on killing Amma rather than allowing Amma to have any independence whatsoever. Maybe I was reading too deeply into it because I was in such a heightened emotional state due to all the crazy stuff that was going on in this episode. But even if Alan is not directly involved with all the poisoning of these girls, at a bare minimum, he's complicit and knows what the hell's happening. So the episode ends on this beautiful cliffhanger with Camille driving up to her house, and who knows what's going to go down the next episode. The teaser looks really interesting. Looks like this is going to be a very tense dinner party with just the family. But there is absolutely no force on earth that would stop me from watching next week's episode. I would crawl naked through broken glass to get a chance to watch that episode right now. In any case, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax, or leave me a comment in the comments below if you think some of my suspicions make sense. Like I said, I think at this point we have enough evidence to know that Adora, at a bare minimum, is involved in the death and murders of several girls. The only question that remains for me is to what extent Alan and Amma might be involved. I feel like this episode was the absolute perfect home run episode, the perfect payoff for people who've been loyally following the show so far. But who knows, maybe episode 8 will manage to top it. But I'm going to wrap this video up. I hope you enjoyed my recap and review. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll be back at you all in the very near future with some more reviews. Onwards and upwards.